Afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and in this session, we're going to continue our discussion on mutual funds. So, in the previous sessions, we talked about mutual funds. What exactly is a mutual fund? How does a mutual fund work? What are the different types of mutual funds? How is a mutual fund different from the direct stock picking? And also, when we talked about the three types of mutual funds. That is, the first category was based on the objective, then on the basis of structure, then on the basis of style. So when we talked about the mutual funds based on the structure, we talked about three types of mutual funds based on the structure. So the three mutual funds based on the structure were the open-ended mutual fund, the closed-ended mutual fund, and the interval mutual fund. So what happened in a closed-ended mutual fund, there was a specific lock-in period, and you cannot redeem your amount before the lock-in period is over. In case of an open-ended mutual fund, we found out that there was no lock-in period and we can redeem our investments anytime. And the third category was the interval or the interim mutual funds. So in that case, it is meant that at some points of interval, it was an open-ended. At some point of time, the fund is closed-ended. But when the fund is open-ended at some specific intervals, as suggested by the mutual fund company or the asset management company, we can withdraw our funds. Then the second category of the mutual funds that we talked about was on the basis of style, the active funds and the passive funds. So the passive funds are something which is also called the indexing strategy or buying the index fund. That is, for example, buying the Nifty or buying the Sensex. So if the Sensex like Nifty is rising by 15%, then your fund would also rise by the same amount, but it might be some less like due to some expense ratios incurred. But it will like move away with the market. If the market is rising, or the benchmark is rising, your fund would also rise. And the second one was the active funds. So the main purpose of the active funds is to beat the passive funds. That is to beat the index fund. That if the index fund or the Nifty is giving you an average return of 15% over the year, the main aim of the passive fund would be to beat that 15% and at least give like 16% or like 17%. But in the past, history has shown that the active funds barely beat the passive funds. And even if they have beaten by a very small amount. The third category was based on the objective. There we had the equity-based funds, which invest approximately 80 to 85% in equity, the high-risk instruments. We had the debt funds. The debt fund was something which invests around 80 to 85% in debt instruments, which are appropriate for the risk-averse investors. And the third category was the hybrid instrument. That was like basically for the risk-neutral people that combine both the equity and the debt instruments. And the 80 to 85% category was for the risk tolerant people who have a higher risk appetite. That when we talk about the risk averse persons, we talk about the risk averse person, the people who are unwilling to take risk in the market. So those would be the person whose maximum component of investment would be going in the debt funds. That is around 80 to 85% of the investment would be going around in debt funds because they're risk averse. And their main aim is capital preservation and a continuous income stream, either in the form of dividend or in the form of the interest payments. And basically, people say that the risk averse investors, whose main aim is for the capital preservation and fixed income people, are those people who are in the age of late 40s or 50s or 60s. Because now they have accumulated a substantial amount throughout their lives, and those people are at the peak of their career. So they can't afford to lose their wealth. So their main aim would be to like preserve the capital or the amount or the money that they have accumulated over the past years and have a fixed rate of interest on that, either by investing into the corporate bonds or investing into the government bonds. So in case of the government bonds, the risk is almost negligible, but not negligible, as I talked about. And so what happens in the case of a government bond? They say that you get a risk-free rate of return, okay, in the form of the T bills or the T notes or the government bonds. You are getting a risk-free rate of interest. And by the risk-free rate of interest, I mean that the government won't be defaulting on their interest obligations. Because ultimately, if the government is defaulting on their interest obligations, then the people or the general public in India and outside India would lose faith in the Indian government. And if the faith is lost in the Indian government, it can create havoc in the society, right? So almost they guarantee you a 6% or like 7% rate of interest, which keeps on changing as per the market. And also I said that the risk there is almost negligible. And where is the risk? The risk is if the interest rate changes. Like for example, if you are having government bonds in your portfolio, and if the yield rises, so when the yield would rise or the rate of interest would rise, the bond's price would fall. And why would the price of bond would fall? The inverse relationship between yield and bonds, and that is the main reason. Okay, so you can incur a market to market loss on your portfolio. Like for example, if the portfolio has both equity and debt, okay, and debt में क्या हुआ कि yields बढ़ गए, so the price of bond would come down, and like when the price of the bond would come down, the portfolio might get affected negatively, and that we call as a price risk. But on the other hand, if the yield falls and the price of the bond rises, so that can be good for the portfolio indeed. But that will possess a reinvestment risk, because now the coupon payment is very less or the yield is very less. And if you are reinvesting that yield, you'll earn a very low rate of interest. So that's a reinvestment risk. So like both the scenarios are not good. So we need to have a balance of portfolios, right? And a risk tolerant person who is investing maximum proportion into the equity category, and the main goal of that person is to growth and capital appreciation, because that person is concerned about growth, and that person is in early 20s or 30s and can take the risk, because that person might have less time but more energy. And why less time? Because at that time he's like searching for jobs, like he's like getting about to get a peak in his career, and he's like searching for the alternative income streams. So that's where that person has no time, because he has to build his career, but he has a lot of energy because of his young age. Like on the other side, the person who was a risk averse, that person has time because like he has reached the peak of his career, but that person has no energy because of age. Okay, so that is the fact. But one thing I personally believe, the age, like which I say, that the risk averse people are those who have the age group of like 40, 60, 70, 80. And the risk tolerant people are those people who have the age group of like 20s or early 30s. I think that's just a myth. Because I've seen people who are into the age groups of 60s and 70s who are risk tolerant and they want to invest in equities. Whereas there are also persons in 20s and 30s who are risk averse and they want to have a portfolio of more of debt and less of equity. So basically, it depends upon the market situations or the risk appetite of you, um, or the kind of responsibilities. Like for example, if a person is into early 20s or 30s, and that person might have a lot of responsibilities. Like for example, he might have to take care of his family members because of lack of income, like because his mom, dad, or the grandparents might be completely dependent upon him. He might have to build his own home, own car. He has to pay off the education loans and various other different kinds of loans as well. So in that case, the person won't be investing a larger chunk of amount in equity, because his goal is a family goal, right? And he has to pay off the liabilities and all. So he cannot afford the risk of like investing in equities and the amount gets lost, because the equities are the risky class. The market can go on a boom, but when it falls a lot. Okay, so in that case, he has to maintain a portfolio in which he has more of debt and less of equity, because he has future responsibilities. And on the other hand, like whereas a person whose parents are like self-sufficient and financially independent, they have a home, car, and like no loans or less loans, then the person can afford to invest in equity. Okay, so that is something he can go for. Okay, so it is not on the basis of age, which I believe it is on the basis of the responsibilities like that a person faces in life. Okay, so like do not think that if a person is very old age, okay, or like if a person is into old age, then that person would be like investing into the debt funds only. No, it is not always mandatory. That person might also invest into the equity funds also, because maybe he has a lot of wealth and some amount of wealth he is like preserving, and some amount he wants to like have into the equity funds, and that is the category we call it as a risk neutral category. Because a person who is in between, either that person would be maintaining 40% in equity or 40% in debt, or that person would be maintaining how much? 40-60, maybe 40% in debt and 60% in equity, or 60% in debt and 40% in equity. So risk neutral person, his task is to combine what? His task is to combine both the strategies of the risk averse and the risk tolerant. That is both the capital appreciation and capital preservation with growth and a fixed income along with that. So that is the thing he might go for. So that thing like we need to take into considerations and look for as well. Okay. So that was all for today. I'll see you in the next session, like where we would